If you are interested in seeing my video about the first Toriko game, then link is in the description, because here I'm gonna tackle the second game right away. Toriko Gourmet Survival 2 was developed by Natsume and released in 2012, and is a big improvement compared to the first game. Well, almost. So yes, if you watched my video about the first game, I'm gonna repeat some of the same things here or add to it if there are changes or improvements. So, just like in the first game, Fond de Bono, or Bono for short, a very wealthy guy, wants Toriko, Komatsu and Teddy to explore a new continent called Gatsuki continent, which isn't shaped like a hamburger but rather an enormous landmass, which is a bit disappointing. The hamburger-shaped continent in the first one, with its 6 layers, is a crazy idea for sure, but it was kind of fun to see that. Gatsuki continent, on the other hand, seems a bit boring, but well, it's okay. Time to defeat some monsters and discover new ingredients, some of which are exclusive to the game. Which makes sense because the whole Gatsuki continent is exclusive to this game as well. Along the way he meets the other Heavenly Kings as well, Coco and Sunny, who were also contracted by Bono. This time around, the last Heavenly King will also be playable, Zebra. All of them start to work together with the goal to find the amazing jewel meat that's inside a regal mammoth. And yes, the jewel meat is canon and is the main course in Sunny's 7-course menu. All this happened in the grasslands, the first part of the Gatsuki continent, but there are other parts that have to be explored and conquered. After the success of Toriko and his friends had hunting the jewel meat, Star June and his allies start to get involved because, yeah, well, they are the bad guys. In the first game you had 6 layers in that hamburger-shaped island. The last layer was mainly reserved for Star June's GT Robo that you had to fight against. Gatsuki continent has 6 areas, where the last area is mainly reserved to the final battle against Star June and his allies. This time around, however, he will fight himself and not require a GT Robo, so be prepared for a hard battle. But I will get to that. Each area is divided in 16 main missions, and the goal is always to find a specific ingredient and bring back a specific amount of it to the base you always start in. The base is essentially a safe space for the characters that cannot fight, like Bono or Tina, and a space for you to return. Once you've collected the ingredients by either defeating a certain monster or collecting a certain plant, then just go back to the base, a scene will play and you can move on with the story. Now, this might sound good and fun on paper, but it can get somewhat tedious in action because essentially you are doing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, you may say that's the same thing as in the first game, and yes, it is. But even there, it could get a bit annoying having to do the exact same thing for the most part. But here, despite it having around the same amount of missions total, it can get even more annoying. But there is a specific reason for that, which I will get to. So usually mission 16 in each area is to defeat a boss, and here is where the fun actually starts. Well, sometimes. In the first area you will fight the regal mammoth, but as you can see he is massive. So here you will have to wait until he attacks so you can counterattack, which was a lot of fun for various reasons. Number 1, he simply is massive. I don't know, I like to fight against enemies that make you feel really small. Something like David vs Goliath. Number 2, massive enemies like these were not in the first game. Sure, even in Gourmet Survival 2, there are only 2 massive bosses, at least during the main story, but still they are here and they can provide way more challenge than any other boss. Well, outside of Starjun in the end. Number 3, even after you defeated the massive monster, you go inside that monster for the jewel meat. And there you have 2-3 new areas to, in quotations, explore. Number 4, you won't just fight as Toriko but also as Coco, Sunny and Zebra. How can you control all 4? Well, the boss has 2 main phases and in each phase he has 4 bars, let's say. You start with Coco and Sunny and you alternate between both once 1 bar of the enemy is gone. In phase 2 you take control of Toriko and Zebra and the same thing happens. This time around though, the boss will get slightly harder and might add a new attack or have a new pattern. This way you are forced to use all 4 Heavenly Kings to defeat just 1 boss, and I can see why this can be somewhat of a negative thing. Because, for example, if you don't like to use Sunny, let's say, then you still are forced to use him during boss battles. But on the other hand, it's not that bad if you consider that you can easily inflict a ton of damage if you use an item the boss himself throws at you. Like the Regal Mammoth, he throws skulls at you to inflict damage, but if you avoid them, which is easy to do, you can use an attack to throw the skulls back at him. Throwing, for example, the skull back at the Mammoth is a fine idea, but it does way too much damage. Because it takes the whole bar away and that turns a good and potentially challenging fight into an easy and brainless one. However, you don't need to use these skulls at all, so yeah, okay, it's fine the way it is. It's also fine if these massive bosses have 2 phases as well, but it would probably have been better if you were allowed to change between characters on the fly. Like changing between Coco and Sunny on phase 1 at will would, I think at least, make the battle a bit more enjoyable. But instead you have to control Coco until 1 bar is gone. Sadly though, and as I've stated, in the main story these massive bosses only happen twice, while every other boss is normal sized and sadly easily defeatable, even if you are way underleveled. That's kind of a shame because the massive bosses were kind of fun and I didn't expect to see those at all. But, well, I don't know much about hardware limitations, but are massive bosses like these actually pushing the hardware of the PSP? Maybe someone else can answer that, because it would be impressive if it were pushing the PSP to its limits. I am very happy that you can actually use all 4 Heavenly Kings here, and each have their own fighting styles and abilities. So, playing as Sunny is quite different than playing as Zebra, for example. For instance, Sunny doesn't really have a ranged attack, at least at first, while Zebra does. Coco uses poison that can obviously poison his enemies, while Toriko is a pure brute force kind of guy. Or Toriko and Zebra can grab an enemy while Coco and Sunny cannot. At first. It's examples like these that make every character in this game unique and fun to use. Personally, I would say that Toriko is the best of them all because he is the, let's say, all-rounder, and while it seems that he doesn't have a ranged attack, his Cookie Punchy is his ranged attack. Well, maybe it doesn't have the same range as Zebra's Voice Missile or Coco's Poison Cannon, but it still has good range. And once you've improved their abilities, then it gets even more fun. Like in the first game, each character has its own ability tree. They learn and unlock new moves once they eat specific meals prepared by Komatsu, Setsunu, and a new character in the game called Koryo. But make sure to grind for ingredients, because some that are necessary for a character to learn a new ability are exclusive to some areas in the continent. And no, you cannot return to a previous area until you've beaten the game. You will be able to unlock new recipes once you've found specific ingredients in a specific area. Those recipes are rated depending on the rarity of the ingredients themselves, and the more stars they have, the more EXP you will get. That's right, eating all these calories is the only way to level up, and this continues to be quite a fine system. Because you know, in the typical JRPG where you just need to defeat the same enemy over and over and over and over and over again to level up because that specific enemy gives you the most EXP, in here you always have to defeat different kinds of enemies because each gives you different ingredients that you will need to level up or even learn new moves. A system like this stops the monotony of grinding, which is quite welcomed, and I like it. So now the characters. Surely you will be able to play as all 4 Heavenly Kings, Toriko, Coco, Sunny and Zebra, but there are quite a few more characters here that you cannot play as. Instead, they are support characters during battle. I mean, yeah, it makes sense that a character like Komatsu would only be support because he cannot fight at all, but the rest actually can. So it's quite of a shame that you cannot fight as Mansam, Jiro, Rin, Mach, Takimaru, amongst others. But hey, at least there are quite a few support characters that will fight with you. In the first game, these characters were just there to be there and did nothing, outside of Komatsu and Teddy. While almost all support characters will also attack the enemies, most of them also have certain unique abilities. Teddy will sniff hidden items that you cannot see quite easily. Rin is able to put some enemies to sleep. Teppei can one-shot certain enemies, etc. Some will also help you collect the ingredients as well, but mostly after all enemies were defeated, which actually makes sense. After all, why should, for example, Mansam collect anything when he is still fighting around? But Komatsu will collect them while the fight is still going on. You know, because otherwise he has nothing to do. However, others just fight and will not collect anything like Zonge. Instead, he just stands there and looks at you like a fucking idiot. But hey, it's fine the way it is, and the unique abilities most characters have make them fun to use. Yet, I find it to be a shame that you cannot play as them, but oh well. During your adventure, you will have 2 support characters by your side instead of just 1. However, only the primary support character will be able to use its special move during battle, while the secondary one cannot. That's what this bar is for. Once it's full, you can press R1 and square to activate their special move. Obviously, you also have a special move yourself that you can activate once this bar right here is full. Well, okay, the bar doesn't need to be completely full, it just needs to be partially full, indicated by this separation line, let's say. Because the whole bar is divided, and once 1/3 of it is full, the yellow line will shine, which indicates that you can use your special move. But of course, if the bar is completely full, then your special move will be at its strongest, and this time around the special animation will play out. Pay attention though, the bar will go down gradually if you just run around and don't hit or defeat enemies. So always try to keep the bar up by hitting enemies in the face. And by the way, Toriko, Coco, Sunny and Zebra can do a combo attack if both bars are full. The underwater levels, oh boy, they continue to be a thing here. Sure, the controls are a bit wonky underwater, but it's better than in the first game. One major change though is that each area has an underwater section instead of there being a whole underwater layer or area like in the prequel. On the one hand, it's a shame that there isn't a whole underwater area in here, but seeing how wonky the controls are underwater, yeah, I am grateful that only a small portion per area is underwater. But hey, punching monsters around is still a lot of fun, until the monsters are too big. Their size isn't the actual problem though. The issue is where many of them are around. It gets so packed to the point where you can't even see yourself, and that can get really annoying. I mean, just look at this. How the hell is anybody supposed to play like this? Another thing that makes the game rather tedious is the fact that you play as all 4 Heavenly Kings. So, how is this a problem? Well, each king has to be leveled up individually, and so you have to grind quite a lot to get anywhere. Because of that, while it's fun to walk around defeating enemies and collecting ingredients, you have to do the same thing over and over again. It can get tedious after a while. Don't get me wrong here, the grinding itself is not the tedious part. It's everything that comes along with it, like always having to return to the base yourself, sometimes not even be able to leave a certain area until you've defeated everybody, even though you barely have enough HP left or something like that. It's the small things that together pile up into a huge issue. Sure, Komatsu can cook for you while traveling around, but he only does it when all enemies are gone. Now, even the massive bosses aren't much of an issue, even if you are massively underleveled, but once you fight against Starjun and his team, then you are screwed if you are underleveled. Because you can't simply go back and grind. You have to accept the fact that you are in the last area, and there is no way to gather ingredients and level up. And no, you cannot go back, and there are no monsters to defeat. So, this final battle will actually be challenging because even Starjun's GT Robo in the first game was a complete joke against Starjun himself, Tomirod, Green Patch and the new character called Ryote. Finally, the areas themselves are actually a bit more fun to explore here. They are quite varied and don't seem as, let's call it, lifeless as in the first game. Natsume even added a day to night cycle. Well, not really a cycle, but if you have been running around an area long enough, once you've changed screens, then it might suddenly be night. During the night, most enemies will change and be stronger. Some will even be unique and only appear at night. This can also allow you to collect some unique ingredients. Then, if you've ran around long enough and survived the night, the area will turn into daytime again. This day to night cycle was actually a good idea and increases the content of the game, which is always a good thing. But this is where I will end the franchise. I know that there are Nintendo 3DS games of Toriko, but since I don't have a 3DS, I will stop after having played both PSP games. Overall though, both games were quite a fun experience and surprisingly good. Sure, the second one is certainly the better game because it improves on almost everything, but still, both are worth the time and worth owning despite the language barrier. I don't know, maybe Toriko games would have been a success worldwide, even back then when they were released, but who knows, maybe they wouldn't. I mean, even the 3 Nintendo 3DS games that followed after also stayed in Japan for some reason. Sure, Toriko himself appears in games like Jump Force, I believe, but that isn't a Toriko game. With the big and vast, as well weird and unique world of Toriko, the possibilities to make a massive RPG out of it would be endless, canon or not. It's quite a shame that never happened on consoles, only on handhelds.